Hello, and welcome to No Stone Left Unturned. I'm your host, Matt Muller. This is a true crime podcast focused on finding the truth. Good or bad, we investigate each case to the fullest extent. Each season, I'll take you through a case of someone who has proclaimed their innocence. They provide the case, the court documents, and their side of the story. We find the truth. 63% of wrongful convictions involve misidentification. My mission is to create a community of true crime investigators who can work together to find justice. Our client this season is James Griffin. I apologize for the missed episode last week. I wasn't feeling too well, but we are absolutely back. So thank you guys for listening. We even had some new subscribers last week, which is really nice. You could always find me at the No Stone Left Unturned Facebook page if you want to connect and keep listening for more great seasons. So, today we are finishing the state's case against James Griffin. Our next witness is Jessica Miles. She's 22 years old, she's lived in Topeka her whole life, and she's a student nurse tech at St. Francis Hospital. The prosecutor starts with the usual pleasantries and asks Miss Miles if she knows a young lady named Ashley Poe. She says she has been friends with Ashley Poe since 6th grade. The prosecutor starts with the usual pleasantries and asks Miss Miles if she knows a young lady, Ashley Poe. She says she's been friends with Ashley since 6th grade. Ashley and Jessica's connection to the case is they were going to cosmetology school together by White Lakes Mall on the day of the shooting. They were not enrolled, just looking into the program. When asked what route she took to get to the cosmetology school near White Lakes Mall, she really couldn't say for sure. Besides Jessica having no clue where exactly she was at the time of the shooting, the prosecutor goes forwards and asked, as you guys were pulling through the parking lot, did anything catch your attention? Yes. What caught your attention? A man running from the hardware store across the street had gotten into a car on Croix Street. So that was odd to us, just to see him running, and we kind of stopped because we were going in his direction. Why is it that caught your attention? I don't know. To me, that seemed kind of odd to me. He wasn't really looking at anything around him. He was just straight running up from the lumber yard, and usually, if people are running, they're running on the sidewalk or something. Hold on a second. Did she just say that she was coming from the lumber yard? But she was on her way to the cosmetology school. Okay, whatever. Wait a minute. Don't we have witnesses that were driving to the lumber yard and were at the lumber yard? Eh, maybe it's not important. At no point has a single witness mentioned a man running toward Sutherland Lumber. In fact, every witness has disputed that in their statement. What about Al, who was driving to Sutherland at the exact time? He still sees a man running away from Carlos O'Kelly's, not towards him. I don't know why this wasn't brought up at trial. The prosecutor then asked, what could you tell me about the man as you watched him? I could tell that he was a black male. He had a gray hooded sweatshirt or a black dark colored sweatshirt on, dark pants, and he was just running. He kind of was running with his head down a little bit, but not completely. Was he off to your side? Was he already in front of the car? No, we pretty much saw him as he was by the lumberyard the whole time. I sat there and watched him run clear across the parking lot. We saw him pretty much from the moment that we could see him come out of the lumberyard. Again, this has never been a thing. Nobody has ever seen the man running from the lumberyard. In fact, the last 3 witnesses have said that the complete opposite happened. Goes on. How long, time-wise, did you have the opportunity to watch him? It all happened very quickly. It was probably seconds. Where did he go? From the lumberyard, he ran towards Croix Street, and then a car stopped there in the middle of the street, and he entered the car. Can you describe what the car looked like? It was a dark black. To me, it looked like an older Honda Accord, but that's just how I pictured it. It had dark windows, tinted windows, 4 doors. For the first time in the trial, the defense actually scores some points on cross-examination. And I will say that James's attorney does get better at this point in the trial. He does start to actually draw some conclusions, ask some tough questions, but I don't know where he's been for the past 5 episodes. He says, you testified, as I recall, You saw a man running from the lumberyard. Yes. Had you been inside the lumberyard? I'm not sure. That's just where I saw him. There's a fence of lumber, and we saw him coming there. So I assumed he came from the lumberyard. I'm not sure. So it's the north side of the building rather than the west side? Or am I getting my directions wrong? Yeah, the way I remember it, it was kind of sticking out. So he was on the west side of the building traveling in a northerly direction? Yes. Okay. Then is there a hill from the drive area down to Croix? Yeah, I mean a little bit. It's like a slope. And he went down that? Yes. And you think he crossed in front of a car? Yes. And got in? Yes. And then the car drove towards you in a parallel to where you were? Yes. But you weren't able to get a better vision of either occupants of the car or all the occupants if there were more than two? No. That's the end of his questions. Now, what he didn't ask, and what I think he probably should have asked, although I haven't gone to law school, is how, in a few seconds that you just testified to, can you say with certainty the race, the height, the weight, the car, and the gender of the person? What if I told you the alleged shooter in this crime has a limp in real life? Does this have anything to do with James Griffin? Has a single witness put James Griffin in this car? Has a single witness seen James leave his house that day to go anywhere with anybody? In for a penny, in for a pound. Well, I don't see a cent of guilt, and certainly nowhere near reasonable doubt. We're going to get to our last witnesses today. We're going to finish the entire state's case. The last state witnesses are all people James knows and knows well. And although this might seem like these people would know you best, I'm sure you have people in your family that may not love you. They may not really, really, really want what's best for you. A strange family matters happen. And unfortunately, I think James may have crossed the wrong family members. I will give you the chance to decide. First, we're going to take a look at Demetrius Crutchfield. This is by far the most ridiculous testimony I've ever read. Demetrius is here to testify in place of Melissa Shea as his girlfriend. There is a lot of drama at this trial, and it all has to do with Melissa Shea and Mr. Crutchfield. They were both subpoenaed, but only one of them showed up. It was Mr. Crutchfield. The prosecutor asked Demetrius if he knows Natasha Utterback. He says, yes, she was my neighbor when I lived in a townhouse. Do you know about how long the two of you lived next door to each other? Probably 7 or 8 months. Do you know the man seated here, not in the tie, but the other man in the light green shirt? Yes. What is his name? James Griffin. How do you know James? He's my cousin. Do you know Maurice Franklin? He's my cousin too. Mr. Crutchfield, do you know Mr. Griffin to go by any names other than Griffin? Just Biggie. Mr. Crutchfield, did you have the opportunity to speak with Detective Mike Barron from the Topeka Police Department regarding a conversation with Mr. Griffin about a gun? Well, yeah, how convenient. In addition to speaking with Detective Barron, did you also provide a written statement about the conversation you had with Mr. Griffin? Yeah, because they had some kind of recording or something like that, and they let me listen to it. So I had to copy down whatever was on the recording. What? Okay, let's see where this goes. The police had him write down a recording. Why would Mr. Crutchfield do this? Well, maybe he's a nice guy. Maybe he's just really concerned with justice. Or maybe it was in exchange for something. He goes on to testify that they lived together and knew Mr. Griffin to own a Dodge Stratus and another car that he doesn't remember with dark color tinted windows. Then the real strange testimony starts. You asked Mr. Griffin if you could get a gun? Yes. How did he respond? He said he didn't. Wait a minute. Something about he didn't have any at the time. Did he tell you that he had one in his house you could have? No, he didn't. He didn't? No. Did you write that in your statement? No, I didn't. Tell us more about this conversation. The prosecutor introduces Exhibit 13. This is your handwritten statement, yes? Can you take a look at it to refresh your memory? And at this moment, Mr. Crutchfield asks for a 5-minute break with the judge. He obviously has something he needs to talk about. Now, what is happening from my perspective is he wrote down this statement because someone made him, either to get out of trouble or so the police would leave him alone. But let's see what it says. When they return from the break, Mr. Crutchfield wants to clarify some things. He asked about his girlfriend and if she would get in trouble for not being here today. The prosecutor says, no, she'll be fine. This is a blatant deal made in the middle of a courtroom, and no one seems to care. This guy is clearly testifying in exchange for something and has said nothing really that groundbreaking thus far. The prosecution goes on. Do you remember you had a conversation with Mr. Griffin regarding a gun? Yes. Do you recall where it took place? Yes. We were riding in a Dodge Stratus. Did you ask about a gun you could get for protection? Yes. Well, he said he had one bit, I think, but I think he might have been the second time. I'm not really sure. I asked him, and then he said he had one, but I didn't want it. Where? At his house. Did that seem strange, a comment like that to you? No, not really. Did you ask why? Yeah, he said somebody had been shot with it or something. Did you say who shot somebody with it? He said Maurice. Did you ask any further questions? Yes. I asked why did Maurice shoot the guy? I think he said he was robbing him or something. Why did Maurice shoot him, according to Mr. Griffin? I guess he didn't have no money. How did Mr. Griffin know all this? He drove him. Do you recall if you gave the detective Barron any more detail than what you put in your written statement? No, I had a cousin that came down and he was recording a bunch of conversations or whatever was on the conversations is what I know, and that's what I put down. Okay, this is interesting. Next they ask, who is Melvin Simpson? That's my cousin. Sometime after this conversation you had with Mr. Griffin about him driving Maurice, did you have contact with Mr. Melvin Simpson? Yeah. The gist of the rest of this testimony is Melvin was wearing a wire and had a conversation with James and Mr. Crutchfield, which is the senior parent of the Crutchfield testifying right now. He asked James about a shooting. The statement in court is, hey Biggie, didn't you and Maurice try to rob some guy from Topeka and Maurice shot him? And James responds, no, that wasn't me. I didn't do that. Sometime after the conversation, did Mr. Griffin come to you? Yes. He asked me, did I tell Marvin that? And I said, I didn't say anything. So there's some sort of recording, and apparently James is present for the conversation, but at no point admits to being part of this incident. And obviously, nobody trusts this Melvin guy because he's wearing a wire in someone's house. Well, let's go into the cross-examination. Mr. Crutchfield, let's talk about this recording. Where did this recording take place? We were at the house in Independence. Were you visiting or did you live there? I lived there. Mr. Simpson comes to that house wearing a wire. Yeah. And he talks about this topic. Yup. Then Detective Barron plays this recording for you? Yeah, he plays it. Then he tells you to write down what's on the recording? Well, yeah. He didn't tell me to, I wrote it down for him. Where were you when this conversation took place? I was in Johnson County Jail at the time. They're talking about when did he write down this for the detective. What were you in jail for? Burglary. Have you been known to use drugs from time to time? Yeah. Do you remember were you high? Yeah, I probably was. Is it possible you heard this from people other than James? It was a long time ago. I understand. James wasn't there, was he? He was. You're saying you think he was there in the summer of 2002. The second conversation on the tape recorder. James wasn't there, was he? I think so. He wasn't there? Yeah. What statements are you positive, as you sit here, came out of James's mouth, if any? That day? Any day. I got a 2-page statement. What on that 2-page statement, as you sit here, are you positive, under oath, came out of James's mouth, if anything? Well, that day, he just said he didn't do it. Think about that. On direct, the prosecutor asks, but what about that time you were in the car alone with Mr. Griffin and no recording was present and you said you heard him say Maurice had robbed a man and shot him? Yes. And it was during this conversation that Mr. Griffin told you he knew that because Mr. Griffin had drove him? Yes. As you sit here, you're positive that those things came out of James's mouth? You're not confusing the conversations you had with other people? As you sit here today, you're positive that came out of James's mouth? Yeah. As I recall in your testimony, was it because that someone was shot? Because they owed Mr. Franklin money? Is that what you indicated? They didn't have his money or something. Didn't have his money? I knew you said something like that. Yeah. That last part might be slightly confusing. The prosecutor is not actually quoting what he said in his statement. So on cross-examination, James's attorney is clarifying. At no point did they say the guy was shot because of any beef. It was because he didn't have money or something. This is information that could have easily been taken from the news, been taken from any reports, or fed to him from anybody in that jail. At no point has anyone brought up material information about the crime that gives them firsthand knowledge, any sort of knowledge from somebody that actually committed the crime. So why is this guy even allowed to testify? I really don't understand. I really don't think we can take Mr. Crutchfield at his word in any of this for a few reasons. Number one, he's obviously promised something for this statement. He made this deal while in jail for another crime. Two, if all of this was so crystal clear, why didn't they play the recording? Surely, if this happened exactly how they're trying to frame it, they would just put the tape up for the jury to hear. That would make the most sense, right? Why wouldn't they? Clearly, this is not as crystal clear as they'd like it to be. We never hear this tape. He's clearly uncomfortable and doesn't know what he's doing. He asks for a break. He wants to talk to the prosecutor. Something stinks here. The next witness is going to be Natasha Utterback. She's a 19-year-old resident of Kansas City, and she's testifying because she was neighbors with Melissa Shea. They lived in a townhome together. Miss Shea also had Mr. Crutchfield and Michi living with her. If you have never been in a townhome, they typically share walls, but you own your own space. Natasha's townhome was right next to Melissa Shea's. The prosecutor asked, is there anything special about your townhomes? Yes. In the basement, there is a hole that is in the wall and is connecting both of us. So you could see into Miss Shea's and Mr. Crutchfield's townhome? Yes. What was in their basement? Nothing really. What about yours? My bedroom. So this girl lives in a basement and has no problem with anyone watching her through a hole in the wall. No, not to mention the heating bill and the air conditioning bill when there's a giant hole in a shared space between two townhomes. Why would nobody patch this? It makes no sense. Back to the prosecution. During the time frame you lived next door to Miss Shea and Mr. Crutchfield, what was your relationship with Mr. Griffin? At the time, he was my boyfriend. What kind of cars did he have? Cars. What kind of cars did he have? A Mazda 626 with tinted windows and a Toyota Camry. Mr. Utterback, during the time that you were boyfriend and girlfriend with Mr. Griffin, did you come to know Mike Barron, the detective? Yes. I want to call your attention to December 2002. Do you remember having a conversation with Detective Barron about Mr. Griffin? Probably. Did he ask you some info about Mr. Griffin? and robberies in Topeka? Yes. Mr. Utterback, let me show you State's Exhibit 4. He hands her a statement made by her, written by her. The prosecutor asked her to recall a conversation she had with James when he was frustrated. Did you ask him why he appeared frustrated? Yeah. How did the topic of the robbery get brought up? Because Melvin was next door. I asked him what was wrong, and he said Melvin showed up, and he didn't want him to see him. Did you ask him why don't you want Melvin to see you? Yes. What did he say? He said, a while back we got in trouble together for something. He said they'd done a robbery together, and something ended up shooting some guy. Did he tell you anything that happened at the restaurant other than that they tried to rob a restaurant? That they shot the guy and he ended up paralyzed. Cross-examination. This is where it gets good. Miss Utterback, is it a fair statement that you and James are no longer friends? Yes. You don't like him very much, do you? No. This statement was given December 11th, 2002, right? Yes. Do you remember Officer Barron talking to you in November 2002? Yes. And if he says in his report, I asked Utterback if she had knowledge of any robberies in Topeka. Utterback states that she had not heard any. Is that what you told him that day? I don't know. He wouldn't make it up, would he? No. If he says, I then asked Utterback what she knew about a robbery at Carlos O'Kelly's, Utterback stated she did not know anything about it. Is that what you would have said then? Yes. Now, between that day and December 11th, did you have some discussions with Melissa? Yes, because your statement says December 11th statement, after talking to Melissa after coming back from Topeka, Kansas, she was telling me the story of Melvin and James doing a robbery. Is that what you wrote? Yes. Did you know a thing about it a month before? Then you talked to Melissa, and then you gave this statement? Yes. So, obviously now, we need to talk to Melissa Shea. But clearly, if this girl knows anything, she's simply just repeating whatever Melissa Shea said. So, we bring Melissa Shea to the stand. Melissa Shea is the fiance of Mr. Crutchfield, who just testified before Utterback. She meets up with the detective outside the detention center, and Mr. Crutchfield says that she has something to testify to. She had a conversation that she overheard. So what is this conversation about? Let me guess. James Griffin. Prosecutor asked, what did you hear Mr. Griffin say? He was just the driver, and he was picking up, I guess, Maurice, and a man had been shot inside the building. It was a robbery gone bad or something. Did Mr. Griffin say what his role was in the burglary or robbery gone bad? The driver. Did he say where it occurred? No. That's it. This is the entire state's case. A few people who think they saw a man running from far away. A desperate, incarcerated man who remembers a conversation but has no proof it occurred. The fiance of the incarcerated man with the same statement spreading it to other people. An upset ex-girlfriend testifying with information given to her by detectives a month prior. Think to yourself, did James do anything wrong here besides owning a black car with tinted windows? Doesn't everyone have an ex-girlfriend that isn't their biggest fan? You probably have a family member that is a little selfish, doesn't really care enough to do what's right. Maybe a little less jail time is worth it to them. We've seen no video, no audio, and no material information to connect James to this case. A detective never came forward with the recorded statement, even though they had the capacity. A witness hasn't said anything about the gun. We have never even seen the alleged gun in this crime. Nobody can say the model of the car at Carlos O'Kelly's. In the next few episodes, we're going to go over James's defense, and then we're moving on to a new case, a new season about a murder in 2011. Thank you so much for listening. Join the Facebook group if you want to get involved, or you can reach out to me, and we'll keep digging. Thank you guys for listening. All right, we'll see you next week.